Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. We live in a world of uncertainty when it comes to the COVID-19 virus, and many people have a lot of mixed opinions and attitudes, as well as information about what they can do to be sure that their body is strengthened. One thing that's been consistently true throughout history is the way even ancients looked at the way the body worked, especially when it comes to the intestines. In fact, it's a well-known fact that if we definitely build our intestinal flora, which will actually strengthen our immune system, it also actually reduces inflammation and improves gut health. We're going to find out the difference between things such as prebiotics and probiotics, along with good eating habits to strike a good balance between fermentation and petrification germs within the intestines. On the program today is a naturopath who specializes in detoxification and rejuvenation. He has been on our program many times and is the author of several books, including Acid Alkaline Diet for Optimum Health, Natural Remedies for Inflammation, Liver Detox, Natural Antibiotics and Antivirals, and Good Sugar, Bad Sugar. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Dr. Christopher Vassie. Dr. Vassie, thank you for being on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Well, hello, Daniel. Well, it's a pleasure to be able to talk with you again.
Now, let's go ahead and talk about what the intestines is, starting with the small to the large. I mean, what exactly is the function of these particular organs of the body?
Well, the small intestine is about 4 meters long, and it's called small because the next one, the colon, is is wider, not much wider, but wider. And it's a long tube which receives digestive juices from the stomach, from the liver, pancreas, and so forth. And it is the place where the food we eat is digested, that is broken down in small pieces, so small that they are able to traverse the walls of the intestine, go into the blood, and then being carried out to the cells of the body. So the digestion takes place in the small intestine, most part of it, and the colon, which follows, which is much shorter, it's maybe 1 meter 50 or 2 meters, is the place where the rest of the foods is transformed and prepared to be eliminated as stools. There's still a bit of digestion, but most of it has taken place higher up in the small intestine.
Well, you know, it's pretty fascinating when you come to discover exactly how much this does for the body, other than, you know, people think of it as just kind of digesting food, but there's so much more that the intestine does, isn't there?
Yeah, but it does it thanks to the intestinal flora, which is in the intestine. And the intestinal flora is the population of microorganisms which live in the intestine. Those microorganisms are bacteria, fungi, yeasts, and viruses. But those are the main kinds. But most of them are bacteria. And there are a great variety of them, as there are more than 400 species of bacteria which can enter the composition of the intestinal flora. And each of these species can have subgroups, up to 200 subgroups. So it's many different kind of bacteria and fungi which are living together in the intestine. There are numerous microbes in the intestine, helpful bacteria. It is estimated there is 100 trillion of them. This figure is so big, I think nobody can really represent themselves what it is. But just to give a comparison, to give an idea, our body has 10 times less of these, of the number of cells of our body is 10 times lower than that. So just to show there are many, many different bacteria in the intestine building this intestinal flora. They're all very small. They all carry out a certain work. They have a function. Each of them carry out only a small work. The work they do is very small, But when you have 100 trillion of them working, then it's a big help for the body. And it is, some people say that if suddenly our whole intestinal flora would be destroyed and disappeared, we would not survive very long, just a few days, and then the body will not be able to function anymore. Just to show how important and vital it is that this intestinal flora is healthy.
Now, let's talk about, too, what the balance between fermentation and putrefaction germs. What exactly is going on there?
Yeah, well, there are two main kind of bacteria in the intestine. They are fermentation bacteria and they are putrefaction bacteria. It's two ways of transforming the food and preparing. Some do it by fermentating and the others by putrefaction. And there are many more fermentation bacteria. 85% of the intestinal flora is made of fermentation bacteria. They populate the small intestine and the beginning of the colon, that's the ascending colon, and half of the transversing colon. And then starts the putrefaction bacteria, which represents 15% of the whole intestinal flora, and they populate the last bits of the colon. 85 and 15 is not 50-50, but we talk about the balance between the two. And this is important. They are different. They carry out different works. Fermentation bacteria are mostly on the digestive, work on the digestive level. Putrefaction, they prepare the bowls to be able to eliminate all the rest of the foods. Now, these two populations must stay in this balance, and the problem is that there are many enemies of the intestinal flora, and mostly of the fermentation bacteria, which can lower the number of this flora, fermentation flora. And when this is the case, then the putrefaction bacteria have more place to live in, more food to eat, and they start to colonize the anti-colon. And they start to colonize also the small intestine, which is very bad because the body can tolerate a certain number of putrefaction bacteria, but when there are too many of them, they produce too much toxics. And normally these toxics are not so numerous, so the body can neutralize them and everything is fine. But when the population of putrefaction bacteria rises, then there's a lot of toxics which are produced, and this is leads to different kind of illnesses.
Now, it's pretty amazing. I'm kind of curious now, when things aren't in balance, what are some of the things people tend to feel when the intestine's kind of out of balance, not really functioning the way it's supposed to?
Yeah, so one of the first thing people can observe is that they cannot digest as well as before. And the reason is that the fermentation bacteria, they work on the food we eat. What they eat is the fibers which are in our food, in the fruits, vegetables, nuts, whole cereals. They nourish themselves on these fibers. So when we eat our digestive juices, digestive foods, that is, break them in small pieces, but they cannot break them to the end to really small pieces, and that's where the bacteria, intestinal bacteria, start to work. They divide these small bits in smaller bits, and they nourish themselves with the vitamin, minerals, and so forth, which they liberate by this, the work they do. So, yeah, I've lost the thread, what I was saying. Yeah, one important part of the digestive process is carried out by the fermentation bacteria. And when their number is too low, because of different reasons we can talk about later on, they don't help as much to digest, and the person will feel he's not digesting well. He's he's unwell, he's got pain in his intestine in one place or another, he has nausea, there's a big production of gas, he has bloating, his tongue is white and his mouth is coated because there are a lot of toxins produced. He can also have diarrhea because the food is not divided in, there's some big bits of food which are left and which are aggressive to the walls of the intestine, and the body reacts and creates diarrhea to get rid of them the more quickly as possible. Or the opposite can also take place. These undigested foods spasm the intestine and it leads to constipation. So all kind of problems with the digestive tube, the digestion is a first sign that the intestinal flora is not in order.
Now, let's talk about, for instance, the kinds of foods or maybe eating habits people have that would cause this intestinal flora to be reduced.
Well, that habit, the worst habit, is to not to eat enough of the fibers which are in plant foods. These fibers, which are soft fibers, which we must not, well, there are two kinds of fibers. There are hard fibers, which are in the husk of the cereal grains, and they can be digested neither by us, neither by the digestive juices, nor by the bacteria of the intestinal flora. They are used to fill in the intestine to fight against constipation. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about soft fibers, which are, to give a few names, mucilaginous substances, or pectins, or oligosaccharides. Well, soft fibers, which are found in fruits, in vegetables, nuts, and whole cereals. So when someone, and that's where the bad habit comes in, eats only cereals, white, which is not whole, that is white bread or white pasta, or who eats, never eats nuts, eats vegetable, but not much because of different reasons, and fruits, well, just every now and again, but not much. Well, this is a person who is not nourishing himself correctly, nor is he nourishing the fermentation flora of the intestinal flora. And therefore, these fermentation bacteria will not be nourished well enough. They won't be strong, they'll be weak, they will multiply less, and therefore the intestinal flora will become weaker and weaker with different problems coming. That's the big problem which makes a weak intestinal flora, not eating enough of fibers which are in plant foods. In fact, it's quite simple. If someone eats correctly, natural foods and all, he will never have any problem with his intestinal flora unless he takes antibiotic. And that's the second big enemy of the intestinal flora, antibiotics. Because antibiotics have the aim to kill pathogenic bacteria. But they are not so specific. They kill the pathogenic germ, but also it can also kill other germs, among them germs from the intestinal flora. And depending on the antibiotic, many fermentation bacteria can be destroyed, killed, and this will weaken the intestinal flora.
Now, when it comes to rebuilding, let's say somebody's actually diminished this, what are some recommendations that you would make? Obviously getting a lot more plant-based diet into the body because, as you were saying, the fibers are some of the things that this bacteria, this flora feed on. But what are some other things people can consider doing?
Well, this is the most important. It's quickly said, eat more fruits, vegetables, and so forth. But by saying that, we mean that every day the person must eat fruits and vegetables and whole cereals, and not only at one meal but at several meals, for snacks in between, for desserts and so forth, so that there's a lot of those fibers which come in because the fermentation bacteria live exclusively on those fibers. Now, another thing which can be done is to take whey. Whey is a liquid which appears when you when you put milk, you curdle milk. There's a hard part of it, and there's also a liquid which is whey. And this liquid, when it is transformed into powder, is 3/4 rich in lactose, which is something very similar to the fibers we were talking just a minute ago. And the bacteria love this lactose, and they thrive on it. They become very strong. They can multiply well. And this is a good way to nourish the intestinal flora. What we've just talked about now, the foods, fruits, vegetables, and so forth, and whey, these are what is called a prebiotic. Prebiotics means something, they are substances which can food the bacteria of the intestinal flora. And they must not be confused with probiotics. Probiotics are not foods, they are bacteria which can be brought into the intestine so that the intestinal flora increase in number very quickly. So prebiotic, eating enough fruits, vegetables, whole cereals, and taking whey. You can buy that in natural, in shops selling natural foods. It's a powder. You mix it with water, and you have a very agreeable drink. And you drink 3 or 4 glass of this whey a day, and this helps the rebuilding of the intestinal flora.
It's also fascinating to realize how simple it is to keep things, in balance, as you were saying. But then sometimes people kind of stretch out and they find that they're doing the wrong things without maybe knowing about that. Now, let's talk about which foods have both prebiotic qualities and which ones have probiotic qualities.
Yeah, well, the prebiotics we've just talked about. Now, probiotics are, as I said, are bacteria which can be brought into the intestine to rebuild the intestinal flora. And some foods have a very high proportion of probiotic bacteria. These would have in common the characteristic of being obtained through lactic fermentation. It's interesting to know the lactic bacteria in the food or brought in the food will multiply and eat the carbohydrates of the foods. So they multiply and their number increase, and they also produce lactic acids, which is harmful for putrefaction bacteria. So the putrefaction bacteria, those bacteria which can make the food rot or decompose, are not active anymore. So foods which are lacto-fermented are food that you can keep for a long time. So once the food is obtained, it is rich in probiotic, that is in bacteria. And when you eat that food, well, you can benefit of all those bacteria coming in the intestine. One of these foods is yogurt. Yogurt mixed with different kind of bacteria. Milk mixed with different bacteria will give a yogurt. Nowadays, yogurt is produced in huge quantity in a certain way which kills the bacteria. What we are interested in are yogurts which are called bifidus yogurts, because they are produced at low temperature and the bacteria are still alive. in one pot of yogurt, you've got 1 billion of bacteria, which is interesting for the intestinal flora. So if someone wants to rebuild its intestinal flora, he can eat, for example, 4 or 5 yogurts a day. If it's just a question of maintaining the level, then 1 or 2 yogurts a day is good. But there are other kind of probiotic foods. There is the active concentrates. I think in the USA it's Dan Active is one of the brands. It's done in the same way as yogurts, but the content in bacteria is much higher, 10 billions in one of those small pots. That's taking every day, 1 or 2 pots will help the intestinal flora build up again. But another, I won't give you a too long list, but another product which is very interesting is kefir. It's milk fermented with different bacteria. It gives a fizzy drink which has an acidic taste, but it's a pleasant taste. In fact, kefir means that gives pleasure. That means it's a good drink to have. And it's very rich in bacteria, between 25 and 30 billions of bacteria for 8 ounces of kefir. You can buy kefir in a shop, but you can also buy the kefir grains. That is the bacteria which you use to make the milk ferment, and you can use it for a long time, because each day when you have your kefir, you take out the kefir grains and put it in a new pot with milk and so forth every day, and you go on like that. So those are foods which can bring us quite a few probiotic bacteria, which when they come into the intestine can settle there and then increase or maintain the intestinal flora. Just to mention just a few others, sauerkraut, or those oriental preparation like miso, kombucha, kvass, natto, and so forth, soya sauce, all those kind of products which are obtained by fermentation are more or less rich with bacteria which are beneficial for the intestinal flora.
Now, when it comes to probiotic supplements, what do you recommend? I mean, you talked about kombucha. Obviously, kefir is another thing people can consider. But what about supplements, especially the ones they sell out there on the market?
Well, those supplements are much richer in bacteria. In one gel cap, you can have as many as 550 billion bacteria, to compare with the 1 billion in a yogurt or 10 billion in active concentrate and so forth. So it's not food anymore, it's not diet, it's therapy with concentrated intake of bacteria. These bacteria are chosen to be able to, once they're in the intestine, to survive and to attach themselves to the wall of the intestine, and then as they are natural inhabitants of the intestine, to multiply in order to rebuild the intestinal flora. They are prepared in a certain way so that they are freezed and dry, so that they are not active when they are put in the gel cap. But once the gel cap comes into the intestine, it's surrounded by water, so the walls of the gel cap will melt, and the bacteria will pour into the intestine, take the water present to rebuild themselves, and they become active again. Those probiotic supplements is a way of rebuilding quickly the intestinal flora. When you eat vegetable, fruits, and so forth, or kefir and so forth, yogurts, you're just taking bringing small quantities of food or bacteria, and it can rebuild an intestinal flora, but it will take time. It will take weeks or months until it's really healthy again. But some people have a very weak intestinal flora, for example, after taking antibiotics, and it is useful to rebuild it very quickly. And that's where the probiotic supplements come in. They are effective. They are a help, and it's good to take them when you are in such a situation. In fact, the people who need them are people with recurring digestive problems or repeated infections or taking antibiotics and so forth. And by taking a cure of those probiotic supplements, they can rebuild quite quickly their intestinal flora. But I would like to stress here that you cannot rely on those probiotic supplements all your life to keep your intestinal flora in a good shape. It is indispensable to eat prebiotic, that is fruits, vegetables, nuts, and whole cereals, to nourish the fermentation bacteria of the intestinal flora. That's really important. Probiotic supplements are a help for a short time, but one should not count on them for the long run.
Wow, fascinating journey about what the intestine is and what it actually, the important role that it plays in the body. And, people, if they want to get more information, how can they find out about your work? Is there a website they can go to, how they can get your books, things like that?
Yeah. My book on the intestinal flora, the title is Restoring Your Intestinal Flora. It's published by Inner Tradition. It's probably a book you can find at the bookshop or order on the internet. If someone wants to know more about this book and the other books I've written, there's my website. It's my name, Christopher Vasey, in one word, and then .ch. So ChristopherVasey.ch. And on my website, I present all the different books I've written, and with the summary, the contents, an article or two on the subject. And there are also many articles on different health questions, videos, and also a few books to download free. So there are a lot of information and knowledge given on the website for those who are interested in this subject.
Well, Dr. Vasey, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today, and we look forward to having you again on soon.
Yes, well, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. You can discover more at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter and stay up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50, as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, wherever you are is where you should be. Have a great day.